Republicans are trying to stop you from voting, particularly if you're a person of color, particularly a black person in America. But, more generally, if you live in an area where there's a lot of Democrats. Congressman Mark Pocan weighs in on this and on the police and voter suppression. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Is our national town hall meeting with our old buddy Congressman Mark Pocan. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the #1 big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C. He also represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N, and you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan, Representative Pocan. Welcome back to the program. What's on your mind today? What are you looking at as you look out at the at America? And what pops to the top of your list?
I used to spend 90% of my weeks on COVID-19. These days, certainly we've had a shift with trying to deal with systemic racism and police violence. I think, the important things to mention today, there's a hearing in the Judiciary Committee on the policing bill introduced by the House Democrats. We also officially got word that we're going to be back in June 25th and 26th to take up those bills. So next week, the committee will actually vote on it. They had a hearing this week, and then the following week, we'll be in as a full Congress to take it up, along with some other bills. We're still waiting for the Senate to come to the table to work with us on another COVID bill, which is very, very unfortunate because our state and local governments are hurting. Our frontline workers need protections, and many small businesses have run out or will be running out this week out of their PPP loans, and we don't have anything else in place, and certainly business hasn't come back for many of those businesses. So there's a lot on the plate. We're juggling a few issues, but we are going to be coming back in to deal with them and dealing on the 25th of June specifically on a policing bill.
I should add, by the way, that Congressman Pocan is with us here for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925, and there are, as they say in the radio business, lines open. Congressman, policing is sort of at the top, not sort of, it's at the top of a lot of people's minds, as well as the naked voter suppression, that we saw in Georgia yesterday. The Republican parties, and apparently not just Georgia. It happened in several other Republican-controlled states as well. The #1 voter suppression technique or technology that Republicans have used for years is to force people, particularly people of color, but also people in low-income white neighborhoods, people where there's in neighborhoods where there's a large elderly population, basically, and college students, to stand in line for hours and hours and hours in order to vote. And now they're fighting vote by mail aggressively. There was no story on today's on the app on the New York Times about Georgia yesterday, but there was in the Washington Post. I read the entire story. It's titled "In Georgia, Primary Day Snarled by Long Lines, Etc." There was literally no mention of the fact that the vendor that they got for their voting machines was not the one recommended by their independent commission, but instead was one of Brian Kemp's biggest donors, #1. And #2, there was no mention of the fact that this is actually a Republican voter suppression strategy that they've been using for forever, frankly. So between that and what's going on with policing, I'm curious your thoughts on those issues.
There are two issues. I could talk each one about an hour, but let me say briefly on voting, this is yet another example. Wisconsin was an example in April of why we need to get people to vote early or vote absentee, even better, so they don't have to deal with these issues. And we shouldn't have to be resorting to that. It should be that you can go and not have to wait a long time to be able to vote and have your voice heard. But unfortunately, these suppression tactics are part of the election tactics of many Republicans. So we're going to have to really get the word out about voting by absentee. On policing, this bill by the House Democrats is a bill, and it's pretty comprehensive in many ways. But there's so much more that still has to happen. And largely, police departments are run by local governments, and that's where we have to really affect that change even more so. So There's a lot of conversations we can have about it, but I think the good news, and I always look for good news, Tom, is the polling really is showing people across the country have woken up to this, and you really are a serious single-digit outlier if you don't think it's hard to be a black American and have to have interaction with the police, and I think that's good. So we may finally be able to resolve some of these issues.
I think we looked back, and then I'll be done. Joyce has got some calls lined up ready for you here. But it seemed, my sense of it is that the Me Too movement we noticed in the rearview mirror. I mean, you know, when the Harvey Weinstein stuff came out and Ronan Farrow's article was published, which kind of blew open the door. It wasn't until maybe 6 months or a year later when people were looking back going, that was the turning point, and America will never be the same again. You know, sexual harassment in the workplace and all, you know, a whole spectrum of forms of sexual violence will just simply not be tolerated any longer, including even joking about it. I think this is a similar turning point. I don't think that we'll be able to look back and see all the specific examples and people who lost their jobs and, you know, things like that over it or around it, you know, probably for 6 months or a year in retrospect. Same with Me Too. I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah, you know, in fact, Tom, I would even argue I see a little more intensity right now because we're actually moving legislation in Congress, and we haven't had a bill around reining in police for a very long time. I think the last bill, also Ayanna Pressley has a resolution condemning police violence. I think the last one that was before Congress was, I believe it was 1999 by Danny Davis. So, you know, this is long overdue stuff going back to the 60s. But I really feel that we're watching legislatures move, local governments move, and Congress moving. And that's what we really needed to do and hadn't for way too long.